Thank you. Growing up in a middle-class setting in Kenya, it was very easy to be content with the little that we had. And in fact, the world had its limits. And having a roof over our heads and a meal every day was just enough. We didn't need anything more. However, 8 of us, my mother had 8 children. We still managed to go through all the odds and were able to go to college on a government scholarship. At college, I studied biology, and I quite enjoyed myself. In my final year of my biology degree, I got a chance to do a research project with a senior scientist, and her name was Lucy. Lucy was an insect specialist, and it was interesting for me because as a child, growing up in a resource-poor setting, I played with insects. In fact, my favorite were grasshoppers. I could collect them, preserve them in a jar, and sometimes feed them on grass. And those of us who grew up in Africa, I think a few of us can relate with this. So I went on to do my project with Lucy, and I completed and got my degree. And just before I left on the last day, she asked me, so what are you going to do after this? And I said, well, nothing. I'll go home and figure something out. Then she said, I have a job that you can do. So I said, okay, because as an African child, you don't say no to opportunities. So the job was identifying insects. So she presented me with a jar full of beetles, ants, all collected from a field that needed identification. And to go with that was a very huge book, a book of taxonomic keys for identifying any kind of insect. So I took on the job, and I was identifying these insects, pinning them on a board and curating them for future reference, because her interest was in insect biodiversity. So I quite enjoyed myself, did it for a few months, but one day I had my head down on the microscope. I was just finishing work, and then I could tell she was standing behind me. But before I could turn and speak, she said, I think you can do better than this. And I looked at her in disbelief because I thought I was already doing so well on this job. But I was wrong, because Lucy had a bigger picture for me. She said, I think you need to go for further education. You need to do a graduate degree. And I quickly thought, how was I going to do that? Because my parents could not afford to pay for me. But she said, so I put that question to her, and she said, there are scholarships, and with your grades, I think you can get one. But then I wondered what it would mean for me to leave home. As a 5th child out of 8, I would then be the first one to do that. So I was afraid. And I wondered what my parents would think, because where I came from, it was known that when children left home to go abroad to study, they hardly ever came back. But it was also known that when they came back, they brought with them the riches of the world and made their families better. So I was ready to be that child and to take on this challenge and to take the opportunity and go away and study. So I applied for scholarships with her guidance, and I got 2. So I was on to a great start, and I remember my parents coming to the city to see me off, and it was difficult to part with them. They weren't sure whether I was going to come back. I was going to be the first child to go away, and I was frightened too. So I went on and did my degree in a master's in science, and when it came to a point where I had to choose what to study, I chose insects. So only this time I thought about, I had very clear memories of always suffering from malaria as a child. And so medical entomology was one of the courses that were taught. So I chose to do medical entomology, and I chose to specifically study mosquitoes. And I went on and completed that, and everyone in my class thought I was crazy again, because I chose to do mosquito karyotyping, identifying mosquito species based on their chromosomal banding patterns. But I quite enjoyed it. So at the end of that again, it was time to go home, and I thought I could see what to do next. And so I went on and did a doctorate in entomology, and I still studied mosquitoes. And so looking back from a child who played with insects for the lack of toys to someone who has now taken up entomology as a career, and malaria entomology to be specific, this just shows us that the world is full of opportunities and is full of possibilities. And in fact, for those in the room who are familiar with the process of malaria control and malaria elimination, as an entomologist, I stand here today to say that even that malaria eradication based on mosquito control is possible. So let's go for it. Thank you.